My name is Ava, and for as long as I can remember, my dad has measured success in dollars. But not just any dollars, his dollars. Our family dinners always felt less like a meal and more like a performance, a chance for him to remind me of everything I wasn't. He'd always laugh and say, "Must be a nice living paycheck to paycheck, Ava." It was his favorite jab. A subtle reminder that I, the family's so-called black sheep, would never measure up to his golden standard. But the night my brother stood up for me, everything changed. I never expected him to do what he did. One tap on his phone, and a secret I had kept for years was laid bare for the entire family to see. What would you do if a single moment of defiance shattered everything you thought you knew about your family? I'm about to show you how I finally found my own kind of wealth. "The steak's overcooked again," my dad muttered, his fork scraping against the plate with an abrasive sound. The family laughed on cue, except me. I sat there at the end of the long oak table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, pretending not to notice the smirk he shot down the length of it. "Must be a nice living paycheck to paycheck, Ava," he added, a cruel glint in his eyes. "No pressure to afford the good stuff." The words hit like a slap, familiar and sharp. My mother looked away. My brother Eric froze mid-bite. And that was the moment I realized tonight the tables would finally turn. The air in the Mitchell dining room always carried a hint of wealth and tension, a mixture of polished mahogany and unspoken judgment. It was the kind of room designed to impress dinner guests, not to feed a family. The chandelier above us cast a golden glow over crystal glasses, each one placed with precision by our longtime housekeeper, Marla. Everything in that room screamed control. Everything except me. I'd driven in from Chicago that afternoon after 3 years away. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal, just a casual Sunday dinner at my parents' home in Lake Forest. But in my family, there was no such thing as casual. My father, David Mitchell, ran his life like a boardroom, and his home wasn't far behind. My mother, Eleanor, floated between philanthropy luncheons and charity galas, always wearing her pearls like armor. And then there was Eric, the golden child, the cardiologist with the perfect house, the perfect wife, and apparently the perfect life. I was the outlier, the one who'd taken a risk by leaving my finance job on Wall Street to start an investment firm in Chicago. To them, entrepreneurship meant instability, and instability meant failure. My father loved that narrative. He'd crafted it himself. So he said, dabbing at his mouth with a linen napkin, "How's that little venture of yours going?" He didn't even look at me. His tone was the same one he used on loan applicants who were about to get denied. I smiled, calm. "Busy. We just closed another round of funding last month." "Funding?" he echoed, laughing softly. "That's investor money, not profit. It's easy to play rich with other people's cash." Mom's fork clinked against her plate. "David, really?" "No, it's fine," I interrupted, still smiling. "You're right. It's not profitable. Yet." He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, the faint smell of his aftershave mixing with the overdone food. "You know, when I was your age, I already had 2 properties, a 401k, and real savings. You're 30 and still renting. Living paycheck to paycheck, right?" That line, "living paycheck to paycheck," was one he'd thrown at me for years. It was his favorite insult, a subtle reminder that in his eyes, I was still the irresponsible dreamer, the daughter who never quite measured up to the Mitchell standard. Eric tried to change the subject. "Dad, come on. Ava's doing fine." My father turned his glare toward him. "You don't know that. You haven't seen her numbers." Eric's voice was gentle but firm. "Actually, I have." The room went still. I looked at him confused. He gave a faint, nervous smile. "You sent me the invite to your firm's event. Remember, I did my homework." He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. Maybe Dad would like to see what living paycheck to paycheck looks like these days. "Eric," I warned under my breath. But it was too late. He tapped my banking app, one he'd helped me set up years ago when I was still bootstrapping my business. The screen glowed bright in the dim dining room, displaying my personal account balance. My father's smirk vanished. Mom gasped softly, covering her mouth. Eric held out the phone silently. "That's her account. Not her company. Just hers." The number sat there in black and white, 8 figures, clean, hard-earned, unhidden. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but not from embarrassment. From the shock of watching his power disintegrate 1 pixel at a time. He tried to play it off. "That can't be right. Must be stocks, or it's cash," I said evenly. "After taxes." Silence fell over the table. For once, even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to stop. Mom was the first to speak. "Ava, when did this happen?" "Over time," I said quietly. "While you were all busy laughing at me for renting." My father's jaw worked clenching and unclenching. "So you've been what?" "Hiding this. Pretending to struggle?" I met his stare. "No. I just stopped explaining myself when you made it clear you weren't listening." The silence deepened heavy with everything that had never been said. Eric looked at me with something between guilt and pride. Mom looked lost, unsure whether to celebrate or apologize. But Dad, he just sat there, gripping his napkin until his knuckles went white. For a man who'd spent his life controlling every room he entered, he suddenly looked very small. I stood sliding my chair back slowly. "You wanted to know how my little venture was going," I said softly. "Now you do." No one spoke as I gathered my coat from the back of the chair. The air in that perfect dining room was suffocating thick with shock and realization. At the door, I paused and looked back at them, the family who had taught me the value of $1, but never the worth of a person. "Enjoy dinner." I said, my voice calm, steady. "The next round's on me." Then I walked out into the cold Chicago night, the sound of the door clicking shut behind me like the final punctuation of a story years in the making. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small at all. The next morning, Chicago sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment, hitting the empty wine glass on the counter like a quiet reminder of last night's chaos. My phone was buzzing non-stop texts from my mother, missed calls from Dad, and a simple, "We need to talk" from Eric. I didn't answer any of them. I just stood there barefoot on the cool marble floor, coffee in hand, letting the silence fill the space where their judgment used to live. Eric had always been the golden one. He was the family's living resume, Dr. Eric Mitchell, the cardiologist with a perfect house, a perfect wife, and apparently a perfect life. He never had to explain himself because he never broke their rules. I wasn't jealous, not anymore. But for years I mistook his silence as complicity. I didn't realize until last night that maybe he'd been surviving the same pressure just in a different costume. Around 10 in the morning, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from him. "I'm outside. Coffee, just us." I sighed, grabbed a sweater and buzzed him up. Eric stepped into my apartment like he was entering foreign territory. His hospital ID still hung from his neck, and his hair was slightly damp from the cold wind outside. "You really live here," he said, glancing around at the minimalist decor, the modern art, the skyline view. "You sound surprised," I said. Motioning him to sit, he sank into the sofa, rubbing his palms together. "I didn't mean for that to happen last night." "You mean showing them my bank balance?" "Yeah," he admitted. Dad was being cruel." Again. I thought maybe if he saw the truth, he'd stop. I leaned against the counter. He didn't stop, Eric. He froze. He nodded, guilty. "You're right. But you should have seen his face. I think it was the first time he realized you weren't the underdog anymore." "I never was," I said simply. "He just liked believing I was." Eric looked down at his hands. "You know they compared us my whole life, too. Just in reverse. Every time you did something bold, Mom would say, 'Why can't you take more risks like your sister?' But I couldn't. I was their investment, their safety net. You got freedom, Ava. I got expectations." I studied him carefully. He looked tired, not from work but from years of pretending perfection was peaceful. "Freedom came with a price," I said quietly. "You just didn't see the payments." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You always talk like you're giving a TED Talk. Force of habit." There was a long pause, the kind that felt less like awkwardness and more like honesty. "I didn't know how bad it was for you," he finally said. "I thought you liked being a rebel, the one who didn't need anyone." I didn't need approval, I corrected him, but I needed to be seen. You were always visible. I was always being explained. Eric frowned, guilt washing over his face. You're right. I let them do that. I should have spoken up sooner. Last night was soon enough, I said. He looked relieved, maybe even grateful. You know, Dad called me this morning. He's processing. I think you scared him. Good, I said, taking a sip of coffee. It's about time he felt something other than control. Eric smiled faintly. He said he didn't know you had that kind of money. Of course he didn't. He never asked. He asked today, Eric said quietly. For the first time in my life, he asked about you, not to criticize, just to know. That stopped me cold. What did you tell him, the truth? That you built something real? That you didn't need anyone to save you? He hesitated. He didn't say it out loud, but I think he's proud. Scared and proud. I laughed softly. That's new. Usually he just goes for disappointment and condescending. We both smiled, but the air between us was shifting, years of unspoken tension thinning into something like understanding. Eric leaned back on the sofa, exhaling. You know what the funniest part of last night was? What? When Mom asked if it was crypto. I burst out laughing. Of course she did. She still doesn't understand what you do, by the way. She doesn't need to, I said, still smiling. She just needs to stop pretending I don't do it well. He nodded. Fair. Silence settled again, this time comfortable. Then he asked, so, what now? Are you going to cut them off? I looked out the window at the skyline, the glass towers shimmering against the pale blue sky. No, I said. That's not revenge. That's escape. I've already built something better than payback. He tilted his head. Which is peace. Eric stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You've changed. No, I said, smiling faintly. I just stopped apologizing. A profound stillness settled over me, a quiet kind of victory. For so long I had carried the weight of their disapproval, mistaking it for a part of my identity. Now, with a single honest conversation, it felt like the straps had finally been loosened, the heavy pack unburdened. It wasn't about the money or the shock on their faces. It was about the simple, liberating truth that I was finally seen for who I was, not who they needed me to be. When he left an hour later, I stood by the window watching the traffic crawl below. For years I thought Eric's life was the prize: approval, stability, respect. But now I see it differently. We'd both been climbing the same mountain, just from opposite sides. He was built on duty. Mine was built on doubt. And somewhere between them, we'd both learned the same lesson: sometimes success isn't about proving anyone wrong, it's about finally being free to stop proving anything at all. Outside, the city hummed with quiet energy, indifferent and alive. I finished my coffee and turned back toward my desk, where the next chapter of my company and maybe my life was waiting. The first thing my mother ever taught me was how to smile through disappointment. I must have been 5, maybe 6, when she leaned down in the church pew, her perfume sharp with gardenia and control, and whispered, "A lady never lets them see her sweat." It took me 30 years to realize that meant never letting them see who you are. Back then, Eleanor Mitchell was everything a Chicago socialite was supposed to be. Elegant, organized, untouchable. Her days revolved around fundraisers and ladies' luncheons, her nights around making sure my father's dinner was plated before he walked through the door. The house smelled like starch and secrets. That was our rhythm, her perfecting the family's image while I was relegated to the periphery. My successes were acknowledged with subtle, almost surgical critiques, always reminding me that ambition had to be tempered by appearance, and that my work must fit their definition of acceptable. She even told people I worked in consulting, as if my firm needed to be sanitized to be acceptable. The weight of her expectations was a suffocating thing, heavier than my father's blunt insults. His words were a storm, loud and sharp, but hers were the slow, steady erosion of my self-worth. She didn't tear me down. She simply refused to build me up. By the time I left for Wharton, we were barely speaking. Our last conversation at the doorstep was a warning more than an embrace. Be careful who you become. Years later, when I started my investment firm, she told people I worked in consulting. It sounded cleaner, more acceptable, less ambitious. When the firm finally hit its first million in profits, I called to tell her. Her response, "That's wonderful, Ava. Did you ever consider buying property instead? Something stable." Stable. That word again. Her favorite adjective. My least favorite reality. After last night's dinner, I couldn't stop replaying her face, the way her expression faltered between horror and pride when Eric showed her my bank balance. For once her social mask cracked, and underneath it, I saw something raw. Maybe fear. Maybe shame. Maybe the first flicker of understanding. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from her. Lunch at the club tomorrow. Just us. No emoji, no heart. Just punctuation so sharp it could cut glass. I almost said no. Almost. But curiosity won. The next day, I walked into the Lakeview Country Club like a ghost returning to a crime scene. Everything was the same. The polished marble floors, the distant hum of golf talk, the faint smell of money and sunscreen. My mother sat at a corner table by the window, a vision in cream and pearls. "Ava," she said, standing up with that practiced grace, her air kiss perfectly measured. "You look, well." "You too," I replied, sitting down. We ordered salads, hers with dressing on the side, of course, and for the first 10 minutes she made small talk. The weather, Eric's latest hospital gala, some friend's daughter getting engaged to a senator's son. I let her fill the silence like always. Finally she leaned in, lowering her voice. "About Sunday night." I waited. "I suppose I owe you an apology," she said slowly, as if the words were heavy in her mouth. "We shouldn't have spoken to you that way. Your father, he can be blunt." I took a sip of water. "Blunt is one word for it." She sighed. "He just worries, Ava. We both do. You've chosen a very unconventional path." "Unconventional," I repeated. "You mean successful?" Her lips twitched, caught between a smile and a frown. "Success is a matter of definition, darling." "And whose definition have I been failing all these years?" Her fork paused midair. The mask wavered. "We only wanted you to be secure, to have a foundation." "I built my own foundation," I said softly, "brick by brick, while you both stood by waiting for it to collapse." The waiter came and went, refilling our glasses, unaware that the real meal had nothing to do with food. Mom placed her fork down, her fingers trembling just slightly. "You were always different. You never needed us the way Eric did. You were so independent." "That wasn't independence," I said. "That was survival." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The chatter around us blurred into white noise. Then she reached into her handbag and pulled out a small envelope. "Your father doesn't know I'm doing this," she said, sliding it across the table. I hesitated, opening it. Inside was a photo me at 10 years old, sitting at our kitchen table, surrounded by scrap paper and an old laptop beaming proudly at the screen. On the back, in her looping script, were 5 words, "You've always built your own." Something inside me cracked open. "Why now?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because she said, eyes glistening last night, I realized you don't need our approval. But maybe I needed yours." That was the first honest thing she'd ever said to me. When I left the club, the winter wind hit my face like a baptism. I walked past the rows of manicured hedges and thought about how many years I'd spent trying to shrink myself to fit their version of success. But now a deep sense of calm has settled within me. The rage and frustration that had fueled me for years had finally dissipated. I wasn't just standing up to them, I was finally letting go of the need for their validation. The old Ava would have driven home, replaying every word, searching for validation. The new Ava. She knew that sometimes the only way to survive a family built on expectations is to stop performing for them altogether. As I got into my car, my phone buzzed again, another message from Eric. "Dad's calling an emergency family meeting this weekend. Says it's about responsibility. Are you ready?" I smiled to myself. Responsibility. That was his favorite word. This time I was more than ready. By Saturday afternoon, I'd already promised myself I wouldn't lose my temper. I told myself this was just another meeting, another room where control tried to dress itself up as family. But as soon as I stepped into my parents' Lake Forest mansion, the familiar smell of lemon polish and tension hit me like a ghost. Nothing had changed, same cold marble floors, same portrait of my father above the fireplace, same feeling that every inch of this house was curated to make you feel small. Eric met me at the door, his sleeves rolled up, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "He's in one of his moods," he whispered. "When isn't he?" I replied, brushing past him. The dining room was set like it was Thanksgiving all over again. My mother had arranged the table with military precision crystal water glasses, silver napkin rings, candles unlit but ready. Dad sat at the head wearing that navy suit he reserved for important matters. The chair at the far end was empty. Mine. "Ava," he said, without looking up, voice clipped. "Glad you could make it." "I live 40 minutes away, not across the ocean," I said, sliding into my seat. Mom smiled thinly. "Let's just all stay calm and talk like adults." "Define talk," I muttered under my breath. Eric sat next to me, hands folded. His knee bounced under the table, a tell he'd never outgrown. Dad cleared his throat, sliding a thick folder onto the table. "We've been reviewing our estate planning," he began, that tone of corporate detachment seeping through every word. "Given recent developments, it's time we revisit how the family's assets will be managed." There it was. The real agenda. Mom leaned forward, her pearls catching the light. "You know how much we love you both," she said sweetly, the kind of sweetness that usually preceded bad news. "This isn't about favoritism, it's about responsibility." I nearly laughed. Responsibility, his favorite word. "My lifelong punishment." Dad continued, "As you know, Eric has always been involved in the family's trust and long-term financial planning. He's steady, practical qualities necessary for stewardship." I crossed my arms. Translation, he does what you say. He ignored the comment. "Given your unconventional lifestyle, it would be irresponsible to entrust you with significant control over family resources." I stared at him. "Unconventional? You mean successful?" Eric shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between us. "Dad?" "No," I said sharply. "Let him finish." Dad's gaze was cold. "You may have done well for yourself, Ava, but success without discipline doesn't last. What happens when one of your investments collapses? When your firm takes a hit? Who will clean up the mess?" "Then I will," I said. "Like I've always done." Mom's voice softened. "Sweetheart, this isn't about punishment. We just think Eric is better suited to manage family affairs." "In other words," I said, leaning back, "you're cutting me out." Her smile faltered. "Not cutting out, adjusting priorities." "Same thing. Just sounds better on paper." Dad exhaled through his nose the way he did when clients refused to bend. "You've chosen a path outside the family's structure. That's your right. But choices have consequences." Eric finally spoke up. "Dad, this is insane. Ava doesn't need their money. She's built more wealth than all of us combined." "Then she doesn't need access to ours," Dad snapped. For a moment, no one breathed. Even the chandelier seemed to hum with tension. I kept my tone calm, controlled. "Let me get this straight. You're removing me from the family trust because I've proven I don't need it." Mom reached across the table. "Ava, please, no," I said. "I want to understand. Because this feels less like financial planning and more like a power play." Dad's eyes narrowed. "It's about protecting legacy." "Your legacy," I corrected. "Not mine." He straightened his tie. "Legacy doesn't belong to individuals. It belongs to the family." "Then maybe you should have treated me like family before now." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't regret them. Eric stood frustrated. "This is ridiculous. We're grown adults, not clients. You can't just cut people from the family because they don't fit your image." Dad turned his glare on him. "Sit down, Eric." "No," he said. "You always make these meetings sound like business transactions. You talk about assets and liabilities. Newsflash. Ava's not a liability." My mother's voice trembled slightly. "Eric, please, you're making a scene." He looked at me, then back at them. "No, Mom. You made the scene years ago. We've just been stuck in it." I should have stopped him, but for once it felt good not to be the one fighting alone. Dad's voice dropped to that measured tone that had closed deals and broken people. You both need to understand something. Respect is earned through choices that honor family values. I tilted my head. And what values are those silence compliance pretending appearances are worth more than truth? He glared at me. You've always had a problem with authority. Only when it's undeserved. Mom closed her eyes, briefly rubbing her temples. Can we not do this again? I pushed my chair back slowly. We already are. You just don't like how it sounds when I'm not apologizing. As I stood, Eric followed. Ava. I'm done, I said. If your legacy requires me to shrink, it's not worth inheriting. I grabbed my coat and turned toward the door. Behind me, I could still hear my father's voice, low and brittle. You'll regret this one day. I stopped just long enough to say. Without turning around, I already did. For 30 years. When the front door closed, the air outside felt lighter, sharper. For the first time, the mansion behind me looked smaller than I remembered. Legacy, I thought. He could keep it. I had something better, freedom that didn't require permission. And maybe, just maybe, it was time they learned what real power looked like when it no longer needed their approval. The following week felt like walking through a storm that only I could hear. My father's decision to adjust the trust spread through the extended Mitchell clan faster than any press release could. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, and all of them came with strings attached. Meanwhile, Eric texted daily, half furious, half apologetic. He'd tried to reason with our father, but David Mitchell was a man who'd rather set the house on fire than admit he'd struck a bad match. He says it's not personal, Eric told me one night over the phone. He's just trying to protect what he built. What did he build? I said, pacing my apartment. You mean control? There was a pause before Eric sighed. You're not wrong. My firm Summit Ventures was running at full throttle. We were negotiating a major acquisition of a struggling regional bank, a move that could double our portfolio and finally push us into national recognition. Ironically, the kind of financial empire my father worshipped. Yet even with millions on the line, I couldn't shake the echo of his voice. You're impulsive, Ava. You'll burn out before you build anything real. The thought was a dull ache, a ghost I couldn't quite exorcise. That Friday, I was in my office reviewing final documents. When Tara, my co-founder and the only person who truly knew what I'd built, walked in holding 2 coffees. You look like someone's been haunting you, she said, setting 1 cup down. Just family, I said. Ah, she replied knowingly. The original haunting. I smiled despite myself. They've decided I'm officially irresponsible again. You, she said. Laughing. The woman who works 16-hour days and runs a $40 million fund? Yeah, sounds reckless. Her sarcasm helped, but not enough. They think money equals maturity, I said. But it's never been about money. It's about control. They can't stand that I don't need theirs. Tara leaned against the desk. You've already won, Ava. You just haven't realized it yet. I wanted to believe her. But that night, as I sat alone on my balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline, I kept hearing my father's last words, "You'll regret this one day." I didn't regret cutting ties. I regretted ever needing them in the first place. By Sunday morning, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. But her message, "It's important, please come by," sounded different, softer. So I drove up to Lake Forest, half expecting another ambush. When I arrived, the house was unusually quiet. No dinner setup, no tense formality. Just my mother standing by the window holding a stack of mail. He's not here, she said before I could ask. Went to the club early. Then why am I here, I asked, setting my bag down. She turned eyes tired but gentle. Because you're right about him, about control. That stopped me cold. I've lived with it for 35 years, she continued. He likes predictable things. He confuses that with love. She walked to the table and handed me an envelope. But even control can collapse. I opened it. Inside were bank statements, personal ones, all in my father's name. My heart clenched as I scanned the pages. Several large withdrawals. Wire transfers. A loan from the family trust he hadn't disclosed. "What is this?" I asked. "Your father has been covering investment losses for nearly a year," she said quietly. "Some private deals went bad. He's been moving money to cover them. I think he's close to being exposed." My head spun. An odd mix of emotions washed over me, a flicker of vindication, a hollow sense of sorrow, and a strange quiet dread. For years I had fought against the myth of my father's invincibility. Now, holding the proof of its fragility, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. It was like holding a broken sword, a weapon that no longer held power but still carried the weight of a long, pointless war. "You're saying the man who just lectured me about financial recklessness has been gambling with the family assets?" She nodded. "If the board finds out his career could be over..." I stared at her. "And you're telling me this because he's not going to stop," she said. "He'll double down. He always does. And when it falls apart, he'll blame you for distracting him." I exhaled, sinking into a chair. "Of course he will." She hesitated, then added, "Ava, he respects power. The only way to reach him is to show you have more. Are you suggesting I use this? I'm suggesting you protect yourself," she said firmly, "before he burns you with the same fire he started." I folded the papers and slipped them back into the envelope. For years I'd fought for my father's approval. Now I held the proof that his own empire was cracking. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I don't want revenge," I said slowly. "I want the truth." "Then you'll need both," she replied. That night I drove back to Chicago with the envelope in my purse. The city lights blurred past like promises waiting to be broken. I thought about the family trust, about all the lectures, about every time my father had used the word responsibility like a weapon. He had built his power on perception, on looking untouchable. But perception can't save you from exposure. As I pulled into my garage, I made a decision. I wasn't going to destroy him. Not yet. I was going to let him see what it felt like to lose control, to live paycheck to paycheck on his own terms. The irony made me smile for the first time in days. Control, after all, was just another illusion. And my father was about to learn what happened when the person you underestimated stopped playing by your rules. Monday morning started with rain hammering the glass walls of my office. Chicago looked gray and restless, as if the sky was mimicking the mood inside Summit Ventures. Our acquisition deal with Hanover Regional Bank was entering its final week, and everyone was on edge. The timing couldn't have been more poetic. While my father's financial empire quietly crumbled, mine was expanding in silence, structured, steady, legitimate. Tara stood by the conference table, flipping through the updated compliance packet. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said, scanning my face. "I didn't," I admitted, dropping my bag on a chair. "I found something about my father I wish I didn't know." She looked up. "Bad, worse than bad. He's been draining the family trust to cover his own losses. Private equity deals gone wrong." Tara whistled under her breath. "So the man who called you reckless is gambling with retirement money," essentially, I said. "My mother gave me proof." "Damn," she muttered. "What are you going to do with it?" I stared out the window at the skyline streaked with rain. "Leverage." Tara arched her brow. "Leverage how, I'm not sure yet. But if he's been using company or trust funds without authorization, I can't just ignore it. He's always treated control like a weapon. Maybe it's time he learned what it feels like to lose it." She folded her arms, a slow smile forming. "You're not planning to destroy him, are you?" "No," I said softly. "I just want him to see what power looks like when it's earned, not inherited." By noon, I was sitting in my car outside Mitchell Capital, my father's office building. I hadn't been there in years, not since he told me my startup was a hobby that would die as soon as the market corrected. Now his name gleamed in silver letters across the glass facade, like a relic of a dynasty built on pride. Inside, the receptionist looked up and blinked. "Ms. Mitchell." "It's been a while." "Tell my father I'm here," I said calmly. She hesitated. "He's in a meeting. He'll want to take this one," I replied, handing her an envelope with his name written across it in neat black ink. She made the call. 2 minutes later, his assistant appeared, her face tense. "He'll see you." Dad's office was exactly as I remembered: dark wood leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the river. He looked up when I entered, his expression equal parts surprise and suspicion. "Ava," he said, standing. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "I thought it was time we had a business conversation," I replied, sitting without being asked. "Business?" he said, amused. I didn't realize we had one. I slid the envelope across the desk. "You might want to look inside before you say that." He opened it slowly, pulling out the printed statements. His eyes scanned the numbers, then froze. "Where did you get these?" "From Mom," I said evenly. "She's worried." "You should be too." His face hardened. "These are confidential." "So was cutting me out of trust," I said. "But I guess confidentiality only matters when it protects you." He leaned back, his jaw tight. "You don't understand how these things work, Ava. The market fluctuates. I'm managing exposure." "No, you're hiding losses," I said quietly. "And you're using trust funds to do it." He stood, voice rising. "Watch your tone. You're speaking to your father." "No," I said, rising too. "I'm speaking to a man who's been lecturing me about responsibility while moving money in the dark." He exhaled sharply. "You wouldn't dare use this against me." "Wouldn't I?" For a moment, the only sound was rain against glass. Then I spoke again, calm but deliberate. "You taught me everything I know about leverage. You said control isn't given, it's taken. So consider this a lesson in balance." He studied me, his expression shifting from anger to something closer to fear. "What do you want?" "Transparency," I said. "You come clean to the board and the trust beneficiaries. You fix what you broke. Quietly. Or I will." He scoffed. "You'd ruin your own father." I met his eyes. "I'd protect my mother, my name, my company. If that ruins you, that's on you." For the first time in my life, David Mitchell didn't have a response. The silence stretched between us like a verdict. Finally, he sank into his chair, staring at the papers. "You're bluffing," he said softly. But there was no conviction in his voice. "You always underestimate me," I said, turning to leave. "That's why you keep losing." Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled sharp and new. By the time I got back to Summit Ventures, Tara was waiting in my office with a folder of her own. "How'd it go?" she asked. "He's rattled," I said. "Good. He needs to be." She handed me the folder. "Then you'll like this. The Hanover deal just cleared. You, my friend, officially own 80% of a bank." I blinked. "Wait, what?" She grinned. "The board signed the final agreement an hour ago. Summit Ventures just acquired Hanover Regional. Congratulations, boss. You're the youngest woman in Illinois to own a controlling interest in a financial institution." I laughed softly, disbelief giving way to pride. "My father's going to lose his mind." Tara shrugged. "Then maybe it's time he sees what real management looks like." As she left, I turned toward the window, watching the river glint beneath the fading light. Leverage, I thought. It wasn't about money or manipulation. It was about balance, knowing when to push, when to pull, and when to finally stop asking for permission. My father had spent his life mistaking fear for respect. I was done with both. The next family dinner felt different before it even began. My mother's text invitation had been oddly formal: Sunday at 6. Just family. No excuses, no passive-aggressive guilt. Just a command disguised as courtesy. I knew better than to think it was a truce. When I pulled into the driveway of their Lake Forest mansion, the lights glowed warm behind the tall windows, but the house felt colder than I remembered. I parked behind Eric's silver BMW and took a long breath before stepping inside. The sound of silverware clinking against china reached me first. My father's voice carried down the hall, low and commanding, like a man narrating his own importance. When I entered the dining room, all conversation stopped. Ava, Mom said with a tight smile, standing as if greeting a dinner guest instead of her daughter. "We're so glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it," I said, slipping off my coat. Dad was at the head of the table, wineglass in hand. Eric sat to his right, already looking uncomfortable. A roast glistened in the center of the table, untouched. Sit down, Dad said. We have something to discuss. I smirked. I'm sure you do. As I took my seat, the same chair I'd occupied for years of lectures and subtle humiliation, I caught Eric's eye. He gave me a silent warning, brace yourself. Dad cleared his throat. Your mother and I have been reflecting on our last conversation. Emotions ran high. Perhaps we spoke out of turn. Out of turn, I repeated. You mean when you cut me out of the family trust and called me irresponsible? He smiled thinly. Words can be misinterpreted. Mom reached over to pat my hand, the gesture practiced insincere. What your father means, Ava, is that we want to make amends. The family should stay connected. My phone buzzed in my purse. I ignored it. Dad leaned back in his chair. We've been following the news. Congratulations on the Hanover acquisition. Quite a bold move. I met his gaze evenly. Thank you. He sipped his wine. A regional bank, though risky. I assume you have the capital to manage such a deal. I smiled faintly. 80% controlling interest, actually. We're expanding its DeFi and fintech integration next quarter. Hanover's restructuring plan will triple its liquidity in under a year. His glass paused halfway to his lips. DeFi, he repeated, unfamiliar with the term. Decentralized finance, Eric said quietly. It's the future, Dad. My phone buzzed again. This time, Eric glanced at it, then back at me. You should probably answer that. Dad frowned. We're having dinner. I reached for my phone anyway, sliding it out. The screen lit up with a message from Terra press release just went live. Check CNBC. I clicked the link and felt the blood rush to my face, not from fear, but satisfaction. There it was, in bold on the screen, Summit Ventures' Ava Mitchell, named interim chair of Hanover Regional Bank. Eric leaned closer, reading over my shoulder. Wait, Chair Dad's expression hardened. What is that supposed to mean? I turned the screen toward him. It means the board voted this morning. Effective immediately, I oversee all major operations at Hanover, including its corporate partnerships, compliance audits, and coincidentally, every one of your firm's outstanding accounts. His wine glass clinked softly as he set it down. You're bluffing. I shrugged. You can check if you'd like. Hanover handles several of your mid-tier portfolios, doesn't it? His silence confirmed it. Mom's voice broke the tension. Darling, you're not suggesting I'm not suggesting anything, I said smoothly. Just informing you that any questionable transactions tied to Hanover will now go through me. For review. Eric let out a low whistle. Oh my God. Dad's face turned crimson. You think this gives you power over me? No, I said, leaning forward. It gives me visibility. A word you've never liked. He slammed his hand on the table, the silverware rattling. You've gone too far. Funny, I said I was thinking the same thing last week when I found your wire transfers to Cayman accounts under the family trust's name. The room went silent. Even my mother's polished composure cracked. How did you? I own a bank, Mom, I said softly. You'd be surprised what comes across my desk. Eric's fork clattered to his plate. Jesus, Ava. Dad stared at me, fury and fear battling behind his eyes. You're making a mistake. If you expose this... Expose, I interrupted. I didn't say anything about exposing. Yet. Mom's lip trembled. Please, Ava, this isn't necessary. It is, I said, my tone calm but cold. Because for years you've made sure I was small enough to control. You used guilt money and shame as leverage. But that era is over. Dad's jaw clenched. You're threatening your own family. No, I said, standing. I'm protecting myself from it. The air around the table grew heavy, thick with everything we'd never said. Then Eric's voice, steady, broke the silence. She's right. Dad turned to him, stunned. What did you say? Eric met his eyes. You're the one who always said power is about control. Well, she's in control now. Maybe it's time you learned to live without it. Dad opened his mouth, but no words came. I slipped my phone into my purse. I'll have Hanover's auditors reach out this week. I'd recommend cooperating. It'll make things easier. As I turned to leave, Mom whispered, Ava, please, don't ruin him. I paused in the doorway. He already did that himself. Outside, the evening air hit me like clarity. The house behind me stood silent and immaculate, but inside, the perfect Mitchell family had finally cracked. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one breaking. I was the one standing. The silence that followed that dinner stretched for days. I didn't hear from my father, not a call, not a text, not even one of his cold, carefully worded emails. My mother left 2 voicemails, both versions of, "Please don't do this to our family." Eric, on the other hand, couldn't seem to stop calling. "He's furious," my brother said the next morning. "I've never seen him like this. He smashed a glass in the study. I didn't even flinch. Then he should have been more careful with what he built." Eric sighed. "Ava, you humiliated him, publicly. He humiliated me for 30 years privately," I said flatly. "We're just catching up." At Summit Ventures, my week blurred into a haze of meetings, interviews, and congratulatory emails. The CNBC feature had turned me into a trending name in finance. The headline read, "From Family Outcast to Wall Street Power Player, How Ava Mitchell Rewrote the Rules." Tara walked into my office with a grin and a bottle of champagne. "You're officially the woman of the hour," she said, setting it on my desk. "Investors are lining up. You've got meetings booked solid through next Thursday. And the Financial Times wants to profile you for their Leaders to Watch column." "Fantastic," I said, but my tone lacked excitement. She studied me for a moment. "You should be celebrating Ava. You just outplayed your father at his own game." "I didn't play," I said quietly. "I ended the game." Tara arched an eyebrow. "And yet you look like the one who lost." I leaned back in my chair. Maybe I did. The truth was, the silence that followed power was louder than the noise that came before it. Every decision I'd made was right strategically, professionally. But emotionally, it felt like standing in the ruins of a house you'd spent your whole life trying to escape. 3 days later, Eric showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked exhausted. His shirt wrinkled, his jaw unshaven. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside before I could answer. "Coffee?" I asked. "Something stronger?" he muttered. We sat at the kitchen island. He didn't waste time. Dad's been put on temporary leave at Mitchell Capital. The board's launching an internal audit. I froze. Already, apparently one of the junior partners flagged inconsistencies in the trust transfers. It's only a matter of time before the SEC gets involved. I ran a hand through my hair. "That wasn't me, Eric. I haven't said a word to anyone." He nodded. "I know, but it doesn't matter. The dominoes are falling." I exhaled slowly. "What about Mom?" "She's pretending everything's fine," he said. "Still hosting her book club, smiling for neighbors. But she's terrified, Ava. If the audit finds misuse of trust funds, it could mean criminal charges." I stared at the marble countertop, its surface reflecting the morning light like fractured glass. "He did this to himself." "I'm not saying he didn't," Eric said gently, "but the man's unraveling. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. Keeps pacing, muttering about legacy and betrayal." I scoffed. "Legacy. That word again. He's obsessed with what people think of the Mitchell name. Maybe he should have cared more about what it meant." Eric hesitated. "Ava, he asked me to talk to you." I looked up sharply. "About what?" "He wants to meet. Privately. No lawyers, no audience." I frowned. "Why now?" "He says he just wants to talk." I laughed bitterly. "He doesn't talk, Eric. He performs." Maybe my brother said, standing. "But he's still our father." "Yours, maybe," I murmured. I stopped being his daughter the day he called me a mistake with potential. Eric didn't respond. He just nodded, defeated, and left. That night, the city pulsed beneath my apartment window. The glow of the skyline, the endless hum of traffic, it used to energize me. Now it just reminded me how quiet the top could feel. When my phone finally rang, it wasn't Eric. It was my mother. Her voice was trembling. "He's at the club," she said. "He asked for you again. Please, Ava, he's not well." Against my better judgment, I went. The country club was nearly empty that late. The smell of cedar polish and bourbon lingered in the air. My father sat alone at a corner table, his suit jacket, off shirt sleeves, rolled tie loosened. The man who once commanded boardrooms now looked small. He didn't look up when I approached. "You came," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have." He nodded slowly. "Probably not." We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound was the clink of his ice in the glass. "I've made mistakes," he said finally, his voice rough. "I thought control meant safety. That if I held everything tightly enough, I could keep it all from falling apart. I folded my hands. "You mean us?" He nodded. "You. Your mother. The business. The legacy. I tried to build something indestructible. And instead, you broke it," I said. He looked up at me, eyes tired but clear. Yes, for the first time in my life, David Mitchell didn't sound defensive. He sounded human. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I do want you to know you were never the disappointment I made you out to be. I just couldn't handle the fact that you didn't need me." The words hung in the air like an echo I didn't know how to answer. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. "I didn't need your approval, Dad. I needed your respect." He nodded, swallowing hard. "And you have it now." I stood. "I didn't earn it tonight. I earned it years ago." "You're just finally seeing it." He gave a small broken laugh. "You always were better at timing than I was." I walked toward the door, pausing only once. "Fix what you can. Not for me, for yourself." Outside, the air was cold and sharp. For the first time, I didn't feel anger burning in my chest, only a quiet, strange peace. Power had shifted. The legacy was changing hands. And for once, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about release. The morning after that meeting at the club, I woke before sunrise. The city was still quiet, a gray hush before the rush hour chaos began. I sat by the window, coffee untouched, watching the skyline shift from darkness to gold. Somewhere out there, my father was probably sitting at his desk trying to salvage what was left of his empire. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. By mid-morning, my inbox was flooded. News had broken that the SEC was officially investigating Mitchell Capital for potential mismanagement of trust funds. It wasn't public yet, just whispers on the finance boards, but those whispers would turn into headlines by the weekend. Tara walked into my office holding her phone like it was radioactive. "It's happening," she said. "They're going after your father's firm." Hard. I exhaled slowly. That was fast. "Eric called me," she added carefully. "He said your dad's trying to resign before they push him out." I closed my eyes. Of course he is. Even his exit has to look like control. She hesitated. "You okay?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel something anger relief, but it's like watching a storm hit a house I no longer live in." Tara nodded. "That's because you've already moved on." But had I? That afternoon, my mother showed up unannounced at Summit Ventures. She'd never visited my office before. Seeing her standing there perfectly dressed, clutching her designer purse like armor was almost surreal. "Mom," I said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" She glanced around the sleek glass lobby, visibly uncomfortable. "I needed to see you, in person." I led her into my office, shutting the door behind us. She didn't sit. "The press is circling," she said. "Reporters are calling the house. They're saying terrible things about your father." I crossed my arms. "They're saying true things." Her voice trembled. "Ava, please. He's still your father. He's also the reason this happened." She shook her head. "You don't understand what it's like watching your family's name drag through the mud. Everything we built, everything he built." I interrupted, "And most of it was an illusion." She pressed her lips together, fighting tears. "Do you know what it's like being the wife of a man who built an empire from nothing? Every dinner party, every charity gala, I had to smile and make it look effortless." "That's what being a Mitchell means, keeping up appearances." I softened slightly. "You don't have to keep them up anymore." Her eyes met mine, glassy but defiant. "And what do I replace them with?" "Shame, no," I said quietly. "With truth." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, almost in a whisper, she asked, Is it true you're the new chair at Hanover? Yes. And that your firm owns it outright now? I nodded. She looked down, then back up, her voice trembling. You did what your father never could. You built something without destroying anyone to get it. I just wish he could see that. He can, I said. He just doesn't know how. She turned toward the window, her reflection wavering in the glass. When he's gone, people will remember the Mitchell name because of you. That's what frightens him most. The words hit harder than I expected. Because deep down, I knew she was right. That night I received a call from Eric. They've suspended him, he said quietly. He's officially out. I said nothing. He asked me to tell you, he's proud. I almost laughed. Now, Eric said softly, I think he finally gets it. After the call, I sat in the dark staring at the framed Forbes article on my wall, Ava Mitchell, Redefining Power in Finance. I remembered how proud I'd felt seeing my name in print, how much I'd wanted him to acknowledge it. And now that he finally did it, didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. 2 days later, the story broke publicly. The Chicago Tribune headline read, Mitchell Capital CEO resigns. Amid SEC investigation, underneath a smaller subheading caught my eye. Family divisions and private turmoil surface as daughter's firm rises in influence. The photo was almost cruel, my father mid-stride, stone-faced in a navy suit. Behind him, blurred but visible, my mother's profile. That same day, CNBC called asking for a comment. I gave them one line, integrity isn't inherited, it's practiced. It aired that evening, and within hours it was trending across financial news. My name, once used as a punchline at family dinners, was now a symbol of what came after the fall. Later that night, as I sat on my balcony, my phone buzzed again. A text from Eric, he's at the hospital. Chest pains. They think it's stress-related. Mom's with him. I didn't hesitate. By the time I reached the hospital, visiting hours were technically over. But when I told the nurse my name, she waved me through. I found him in a private room, pale against the white sheets, eyes half open but alert. He looked up when I entered. Ava. Hey. I said softly, pulling a chair closer. You really don't know how to take a break, do you? He gave a weak smile. Old habits. I sat beside him, unsure what to say. The monitors beeped steadily, a quiet metronome marking the distance between who we were and who we'd become. I saw your interview, he murmured after a moment. Integrity isn't inherited. That was good. Thanks, I said. It's true. He nodded slowly. It took me too long to learn that. We sat in silence for a while. Then, without looking at me, he said, You'll do better with the name than I did. For the first time in years, I reached for his hand. Maybe we both did our best, I said. Just in different ways. He didn't respond, but he didn't let go either. Outside, the city glowed through the hospital window, Chicago alive and breathing, indifferent and infinite. And somewhere between regret and forgiveness, I realized the war was finally over. When my father was released from the hospital 2 weeks later, everything about him seemed smaller. The man who once walked into boardrooms like he owned oxygen now moved with the quiet shuffle of someone who had finally met his limits. My mother kept a brave face, still wearing her pearls and pretending life was on track, but even she couldn't hide the cracks anymore. I visited them on a Sunday morning. The air smelled like rain and antiseptic, the remnants of hospital life that still clung to their house. My father sat in his armchair near the window, an untouched cup of coffee on the table beside him. Ava, he said when I entered. His voice was softer than I remembered. Thank you for coming. Mom said you wanted to see me, I replied, setting my bag down. I did. He gestured for me to sit. There's something I need to tell you before the world does. He handed me a thick envelope. Inside were documents, resignation letters, settlement agreements, and a formal statement to the SEC. I've decided to cooperate fully, he said. No lawyers, no denials. I'm stepping away from finance for good. I looked up from the papers. You're really walking away? He nodded. The firm will survive without me. Maybe it'll even be better for it. I studied him carefully. You're serious? For the first time in my life, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You were right, Ava. Power isn't about control. It's about accountability. The words hung between us, heavy and unexpected. For years, he'd measured worth in quarterly reports and stock performance. Hearing him say that now felt surreal. When I started Mitchell Capital, I wanted to build something that would outlive me. Something the family could be proud of. But somewhere along the way, I mistook dominance for legacy. And instead you broke it, I said. He looked at me, eyes tired but clear. Yes. For the first time in my life, David Mitchell didn't sound defensive. He sounded human. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I do want you to know you were never the disappointment I made you out to be. I just couldn't handle the fact that you didn't need me. The words hung in the air like an echo I didn't know how to answer. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. I didn't need your approval, Dad. I needed your respect. He nodded, swallowing hard. And you have it now. I stood. I didn't earn it tonight. I earned it years ago. You're just finally seeing it. He gave a small, broken laugh. You always were better at timing than I was. I walked toward the door, pausing only once. Fix what you can. Not for me, for yourself. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. For the first time, I didn't feel anger burning in my chest, only a quiet, strange peace. Power had shifted. The legacy was changing hands. And for once, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about release. The press eventually moved on. Headlines faded, investors shifted focus, and the world, always hungry for the next scandal, forgot the Mitchell name faster than I ever thought possible. But in our small corner of it, something new was taking root. My father officially retired from finance that spring. No farewell gala, no boardroom send-off. Just a quiet resignation letter and a brief statement thanking his colleagues and clients for 3 decades of partnership. He spent his mornings walking by the lake, his evenings reading. My mother traded charity luncheons for volunteering at a community center. And for the first time in my life, my parents seemed ordinary, humans. I didn't visit often at first. Every time I saw the house, I remembered too much. The cutting remarks, the long dinners where silence was punishment, the way love always came with conditions. But one Saturday, my father called and said, Ava, I'd like to show you something. When I arrived, he was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by files and papers. Gone were the custom suits and the polished arrogance. He looked older, smaller, but there was clarity in his eyes I'd never seen before. I'm dissolving what's left of the family trust, he said. But before I do, I want to fund something new. He slid a single document toward me, the Mitchell Foundation for Financial Empowerment. What's this? I asked. He smiled faintly. You once told me the system favors people who already have money. Maybe this helps change that. Scholarships, small business grants, literacy programs for families living paycheck to paycheck. I blinked, taken aback. You want to help the same kind of people you used to reject. Maybe it's time, he said. Maybe legacy isn't about preserving your name. It's about repairing what your name once stood for. I looked down at the proposal again. The foundation was solid, practical, and ambitious. Exactly the kind of thing he would have called idealistic nonsense a year ago. You should run it, he added. I laughed softly. Me. You've already proven you can build something that lasts. This time, you'd be building something that matters. For once, his faith didn't feel like manipulation. It felt like trust. That night, I brought the papers home and couldn't stop staring at them. For years, the Mitchell name had been a burden, a symbol of power, control, and pride. But maybe, just maybe, it could stand for something else now. Something that meant redemption instead of dominance. A week later, the foundation launched, quietly funded by what remained of my father's assets and matched by Summit Ventures. Tara insisted on adding my own initiative under its umbrella, the Ava Project, a startup mentorship program for women from underserved communities. Full circle, she said. handing me the logo mock-up. From being underestimated to empowering others. I smiled. It's about time. The first workshop took place that summer. 20 women sat in a small conference room downtown. Single mothers, recent grads, women rebuilding after layoffs or divorce. As I looked at them, I saw pieces of myself in every face. The same hunger, the same doubt, the same spark waiting for permission to ignite. One woman, Jessica, raised her hand during the Q&A. How did you keep going when everyone told you you'd fail? I thought about all the times my father had said those words, all the nights I'd stayed awake fighting invisible battles just to prove him wrong. I stopped trying to prove them wrong, I said, and started proving myself right. When the session ended, Jessica came up to me. I want to build a financial app for single parents, she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Everyone says it's too ambitious. Then it's worth doing, I said, handing her my card. Call me Monday. We'll talk about funding. She smiled like she'd just been handed permission to breathe. And in that moment I realized this connection, this ripple effect was what power was supposed to look like all along. It was a quieter, more meaningful victory than any headline or bank balance could ever be. Later that night I met Eric for dinner. He looked relaxed for the first time in months, his sleeves rolled up, his grin easy. Mom says Dad's teaching budgeting classes at the community center, he said. She swears he actually enjoys it. I chuckled. I'll believe that when I see it. Believe it, he said. The man who used to yell at waiters for slow service now spends his Saturdays explaining compound interest to teenagers. Sounds like redemption, I said softly. Eric raised his glass. To second chances. To rewrite legacies, I added. When I got home that evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window. The city glowed beneath me, Chicago alive, unbothered, unstoppable. And somewhere between the bright lights and the quiet hum of the night, I knew that the real work had just begun, the night of the Foundation's one-year anniversary gala. Chicago shimmered like glass. The city had always felt like motion cars' lights, whined ambition, but that night it felt like stillness, as if the world had paused long enough to let me breathe. The venue was a renovated bank downtown, a poetic choice Tara had made on purpose. From debt to opportunity, she'd said with a grin. The old marble floors still gleamed, but now the vault held something more valuable than cash names. Hundreds of them. People we'd helped fund, mentor, and rebuild. I stood near the entrance watching guests file in, investors, entrepreneurs, students, even families from our first microloan program. They greeted me not with awe but gratitude. It felt different, warmer, real. Tara approached, clipboard in hand, a headset perched over her perfect hair. The mayor's here. CNBC's crew just arrived. And your speech is in 20 minutes, she said. Remind me again why I agreed to public speaking, I asked, taking a glass of champagne. Because you're good at it, she said. And because this isn't about proving yourself anymore. It's about sharing what you learned. She was right. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was revelation. I scanned the room and froze when I saw my parents standing near the back. My mother wore a simple navy dress, elegant but understated. My father looked older, his shoulders thinner, but his eyes met mine with something I hadn't seen before, pride unmasked and uncomplicated. Eric joined them moments later, his arm around his wife, laughing about something. For the first time, my family didn't look like a collection of roles, they looked like people. When Tara nodded, signaling it was time, I walked onto the stage. The applause felt like a wave, not loud or overwhelming, but steady and sincere. I waited for it to fade before speaking. Thank you for being here tonight, I began, glancing briefly toward my parents. A year ago, this foundation was just an idea, a hope that we could turn the lessons of loss and failure into something that mattered. I used to think legacy was about what you leave behind. But I've learned that it's about what you keep: integrity, compassion, courage. I paused, and sometimes forgiveness. The crowd quieted, listening. I built my first company because I wanted to prove something, I said, that I could succeed without help, without approval, without the family name. And I did. But success without connection isn't victory, it's isolation. It took losing everything that once defined my family to realize that power means nothing if it doesn't lift someone else with it. As I spoke, I saw Jessica, the woman from our first mentorship cohort, standing in the front row, tears glinting in her eyes. Her startup had just secured seed funding through our accelerator program. Behind her, dozens of others, each carrying their own battle scars. Their own versions of being underestimated, listened like they'd been waiting for someone to say those words aloud. Tonight, I continued, we celebrate not wealth, but resilience. Not privilege, but progress. Because every person in this room knows what it feels like to be told you're not enough. And every one of you proved that wrong. The audience stood. The applause was softer this time, but it carried weight, the sound of stories aligning, of redemption, finding voice. Afterward, as people mingled and cameras flashed, my father approached me. He didn't say anything at first, just looked around the transformed bank, his old world reborn. This, he said finally, gesturing to the room, is what legacy should have looked like all along. I smiled. Better late than never. He nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. Your mother and I donated to the scholarship fund. Quietly. I raised an eyebrow. Quietly, he chuckled. Some habits die hard. Mom joined us, taking my hand. You make this family proud, Ava. Not because of what you've built, but because of how you've built it. That more than any headline or award was what I'd been waiting to hear. Later, Eric found me on the balcony overlooking the city. The wind was cool, the lake glimmering under the streetlights. He handed me a small velvet box. What's this? I asked. He smiled. Something Dad wanted you to have. Inside was his old gold cufflink, the one engraved with the Mitchell crest. I laughed softly. Did he finally admit I earned it? More than earned it, Eric said. You redefined it. I slipped it into my clutch. Then I guess that makes it mine now. When the gala ended, I lingered in the empty hall. The lights dimmed, leaving just the soft glow of the foundation's logo projected on the marble wall. Mitchell Foundation for Financial Empowerment. Beneath it, in smaller text, a new tagline I'd added last month, turning paychecks into possibilities. It wasn't just branding, it was the story of my life. The woman who was once dismissed as still living paycheck to paycheck had built a system that helped others break free from that same judgment. The irony was poetic, just as complete. As I stepped outside, the night air wrapped around me, cool and clean. My phone buzzed. A message from Tara's speech was perfect. Trending on LinkedIn already. Proud of you. I smiled, typing back one word, grateful. Walking toward my car, I looked up at the skyline, Chicago bright and alive, every window a story, every light a second chance. Maybe my father had been right about one thing all those years ago: money was a tool. But what he never understood was that power wasn't in the tool, it was in how you used it. And as for me, I'd stopped chasing approval. I'd stopped counting what I was owed. Now I measured my wealth and impact in people and possibility. Before driving away, I took one last look at the building behind me and whispered, half to the night, half to myself. We did it. And for the first time, it didn't sound like victory. It sounded like peace.